I'm now ready to lay out my fabric and pattern pieces in order to cut. First thing I need to do is reference the pattern envelope directions, where you'll see they have some suggested layouts of how I can lay out my fabric. That can be very helpful, and it can also be helpful to first start by just loosely laying out the pieces. I like to start with the pieces that need to be placed on the fold because they kind of take priority in placement. I folded my fabric in half long ways and have pinned together the raw edges so it's even and smooth. And I see piece 1 and 2, my front and back of my sweatshirt, need to be placed on the fold. At this point, I'm not pinning, I'm just loosely laying the pieces out. I also need my pocket, piece 8. I'm going to have a chest pocket or a stomach pocket, I guess, for the sweatshirt. And I need to lay my waistband, piece 6, on the fold. I'm going to have to slide my fabric down a bit so I have enough room. So then my other pieces, my hood, my sleeves, and my cuffs do not need to be placed on the fold. But I do need to follow the grain line, which it's labeled and we already highlighted it. It says grain of fabric. And I need to ensure it is straight and parallel to the selvage. So the selvage of the fabric is this raw edge over here. So the grain line should be running parallel. So to straighten the grain, what you want to do is start by placing one pin at the end of the grain line. So I'm going to place one pin here. Then I'm going to use my yardstick or ruler or seam gauge to measure from this end to my raw edge. I see that it's 14 and a half exactly. So then I go to this end and I measure again, and I see that this is at 15. So now all I need to do is pivot the paper until it reads 14 and a half. It doesn't matter what your measurement is, but you want it to be the same. And that way I know that my pattern piece is perfectly straight with the grain. I'm going to continue to do that on the hood piece. And then I'm going to pin the corners of all my other pieces in place. So the pieces that go on the fold, placed on the fold. And I'm going to pin it so that the pattern pieces are laying flat. I see that the grain line is straight, and with this it's on the fold, so it's pretty easy to tell. And I want to go through and get all the pieces secured and pinned before cutting. I want to point out, when pinning on the fold, you want to ensure that the pattern piece is directly on the fold and not scooched over even a little bit, because if that happens, you're actually going to end up with a wider pattern piece than you want to have. So make sure you double check that it's placed on the fold and that it's smooth and even. So I've decided to cut my cuff and waistband on a contrasting color fabric. So I'm going to pin these in place as well. Now the waistband says it needs to go on the fold, and it also says I need to cut 2 of them. So I'm actually going to pin this pattern piece onto the fold, making sure it's placed really evenly. And then after I cut it out, I'm going to move the pattern piece again and place it here and cut it a second time. That will give me the front of my sweatshirt and the back of my sweatshirt for the waistband. And then for the, I'm gonna move this a little bit, for the cuffs, it says it does not need to be placed on the fold. It just needs to be placed straight with the grain line. So I'm going to do that again. And I need to ensure that for all my pieces, I'm taking note of where the stretch of the fabric is. All of the pattern pieces you'll see have 2 lines. They have the grain line and the stretch line. So you want to just double check before you cut after you're all pinned in place, that your fabric is stretchy the way it says, or it will be really hard to put your sweatshirt on because the cuffs will be tight and won't stretch. So I'm going to continue to pin. So I now have all my pattern pieces pinned and it's time to cut. So at this point, you want to have someone else, preferably me, double check your placement. Make sure all of your pieces are straight. The ones that need to be placed on the fold are on the fold. They're all straight with the grain. And then you'll cut. So when you cut, you want to cut away from yourself. And you should be standing for better leverage. And you want to cut these pieces out very accurately. If there are any notches, remember we cut those outward. It seems like there are a few notches on each pattern piece. So I'm beginning by cutting my sleeve, and notice I will move my body, not the fabric, to cut it. So I want to always be cutting away from myself and following these pattern pieces very carefully to ensure I have accurate pieces. So I'm coming up on my first notch, and what I do is I just cut, my pin's in the way, cut an outward triangle. Doesn't have to be the most beautiful, perfect triangle, but you're trying to give yourself a marker that will be very important when you go to sew. Directions will say align notches to your pattern pieces, but if you accidentally forgot to cut them out, you won't know where to align them. It'll be much more difficult. So I'm going to continue to cut out all my pattern pieces. So before you remove any pattern piece to begin sewing, you want to note if there are any markings that need to be transferred to the fabric. We've cut out notches, and that's helpful, and we can see that on the fabric already, but there's other markings that you may see, such as on the front of your sweatshirt. So if you're making the sweatshirt with view B, the pocket in the front, there's a marking here where it tells you where to place your pocket. So what you're going to do is use tracing paper or a marking pencil to transfer this mark here to your fabric.